All right, let's jump right in. Today, we're digging into Peter Thiel's 0 to 1. And look, this isn't so much a step-by-step manual, as it is a guide on how to think. How to think if you want to create something radically new, something the world has never seen before.
Thiel loves to start with his go-to interview question. And on the surface, it sounds pretty simple, right? But just try to answer it. Seriously, take a second. It is way, way harder than it looks.
You see, the key here is that a good answer isn't just some controversial take or an obvious complaint. What Thiel is really testing is your ability to think for yourself. A great answer uncovers a truth that's hiding in plain sight. And being able to see those hidden truths, well, that's the very first step to building the future.
And that brings us to the first huge idea. Most of us just kind of assume that globalization is what progress looks like. But Thiel argues that we're fundamentally misunderstanding what the future is all about.
So he breaks progress down into two big buckets. First, you've got horizontal progress. That's going from 1 to n. Think of it as globalization. It's taking a successful idea, like the smartphone, and just copying it, scaling it for the rest of the world. But then there's vertical progress. That's the leap from 0 to 1. That's technology. It's creating the very first smartphone when nothing like it existed before.
Yeah, this image really captures it. Globalization is basically hitting copy-paste on things that already work. It's familiar. Technology, on the other hand, is creation. It's a kind of miracle, doing something brand new. One is about expanding, the other is all about invention.
And boom, there it is, Thiel's own contrarian answer. His point is that on a planet with limited resources, just copying our current way of life is a straight-up recipe for disaster. If every developing nation just copies the American model, we're in for a world of hurt. Without brand new technology, those 0 to 1 leaps, globalization just isn't sustainable.
Okay, time to tackle the next sacred cow. We are all taught from day one that competition is amazing, that it's the very soul of capitalism. Thiel's take? That is completely and utterly wrong.
Now, I know, that sounds like a real mind-bender, but the logic is actually dead simple. What's the point of capitalism? To accumulate capital, to build up profit. But what happens in a market with perfect competition? All the profits get squeezed down to 0. Nobody makes any real money. The lesson here is profound. If you want to build a company that lasts, you have to find a way to escape the brutal fight of competition.
And this table just lays it out perfectly. I mean, think about the US airline industry. They create massive value, flying millions of people around. But in 2012, for every person they flew, they made 37 cents. That's insane. That's perfect competition. Then you look at a monopoly like Google. It has the freedom to think long-term, to invest in crazy new ideas, and to actually treat its people well, all because it's not locked in a desperate day-to-day struggle for survival.
Now here's where it gets tricky, because it's hard to see the world this way. Why? Because both sides are basically incentivized to lie to us. Monopolies pretend they're not monopolies to avoid government scrutiny, and companies in brutal competition pretend they're totally unique.
And they have this little trick they use. A monopoly like Google will say, "Oh no, we're not a monopoly in search. We're just a tiny fish in the gigantic global advertising market." They define their market as a massive union of other markets to look small. Meanwhile, some struggling restaurant will say, "We're the only place serving authentic British food in this specific neighborhood." They define their market as this tiny intersection of niches to sound special, when in reality, they're competing with every other restaurant nearby.
So, if monopolies are so great, why are so many startups obsessed with tiny, competitive ideas? Well, Thiel says it's because we all learned the absolute wrong lessons from the dot-com crash of 2000.
You know, the actual mania, the crazy part, was really short. It was basically an 18-month sprint that started in late '98. And it happened because everything else in the world economy looked pretty terrible. The internet felt like the only way out, the only bright spot. It wasn't just greed. People were genuinely hopeful.
But then, the bubble burst. And it wasn't just a correction. It was a devastating crash. The whole thing was seen as this huge judgment against the big, bold, crazy optimism of the 90s. And the entire tech industry got this collective case of PTSD. And out of that trauma, a new set of rules emerged, a new dogma. Suddenly, big visions were dangerous. The smart thing to do was to take tiny, safe steps. Lean just became a code word for having no real plan. And everybody got obsessed with making slightly better versions of things that already existed. But Thiel's take, the exact opposite is true. He argues that you have to be bold. Having even a bad plan is better than just wandering aimlessly. You have to escape competition, not embrace it. And you know what? Sales and distribution matter just as much as having a great product.
To build the future, we have to unlearn the lessons that fear taught us.
So if competition is the problem, what's the solution? How do you actually go about building one of these valuable, long-lasting monopolies? Let's get into the blueprint.
Okay, so Thiel lays out 4 key things that great monopolies tend to have. You don't always need all of them, but the best companies have a really powerful combination. And it all starts with proprietary technology that's just incredibly hard for anyone else to copy.
And here's the golden rule. Your technology has to be at least 10 times better than whatever the next best thing is. I'm not talking about a little bit better, a 20% improvement. No, we're talking a quantum leap forward. That 10x advantage is what gives you the breathing room to escape the competition.
And this might sound completely backward, but the key to building a huge monopoly is to start ridiculously small. Your goal should not be to capture 1% of a massive market. No way. Your goal should be to capture 100% of a tiny, well-defined market. Own a niche completely, and then, and only then, do you expand outward. Now, we've got to be really clear here. We're not talking about the evil, mustache-twirling monopolist who just buys up all the property on the board. We're talking about creative monopolies. These are the companies that invent something so new and so valuable that they create a whole new category of abundance for everyone, while also building a sustainable business.
This quote, a fantastic spin on Tolstoy, just wraps the whole idea up perfectly. Every successful company is a success in its own unique way because it figured out a secret that no one else did. But all failed companies, they all look the same. They're the ones who got bled dry in the brutal, pointless war of competition.
So we're going to end by flipping that question back to you, just with a business spin. This is the ultimate challenge. The next Google, the next Apple. It's not going to come from copying what they did. It's going to come from someone seeing a secret, a hidden truth, and having the courage to build something new around it. So what's that company going to be?